Brandy, you're up next, if you would, for uh, some additional information about cities.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Okay, give me 1 second here. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. As with all, you know, as with all major technology moments, sometimes it goes a little bit smoother than others. So give me just 1 second here. Let's see. All right. All right, can you see my screen there and hear me as well?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I want to start off by thanking everyone for inviting us here today. My name is Brandy DeLange. I'm a government relations advocate for the Association of Washington Cities. And as
hey, Brandy, I'm sorry to interrupt. We can see the actual presentation. We don't see it big. So I think you need to try to reshare the bigger screen.
Thank you for letting me know. All right, let's try this again. Noelle, is that
perfect? Yes,
okay,
thank you.
There we go. Thank you. As I was saying, I'm the government relations advocate for AWC. We are a statewide association representing all 281 cities within the state. So that means that we have a wide range of folks with a wide range of needs in transportation funding. So I kind of just wanted to start us off with a real overview of what cities are kind of dealing with in terms of their overall focus on lane miles, on street preservation, and all the other things that they need to do in order to really kind of balance out needs. So generally speaking, you know, street city funding goes beyond just supporting vehicles and making sure that cars can go up and down a road safely and in a real succinct fashion. It also supports multimodal infrastructure, it supports pedestrian access, it does utility infrastructure, and it also supports the natural environment around it. So I think Council Member Geraldine did a really nice job of kind of really demonstrating some of the balances that go into creating a truly a complete street. But what I also want to emphasize here is that it is incredibly costly to maintain and preserve these streets. So the typical urban lane mile is about 16 million. And then roughly 1 million more to continue to preserve it. However, if you as a local jurisdiction fail to do or are unable to do that preservation that's really needed on a regular basis, those costs really quickly balloon to $4 to $5 million a mile. And in 2019, the JTC did a study and it really kind of demonstrated that truly local governments have, and cities in particular, have about $1 billion worth of preservation and maintenance needs right now. And the other thing I want to emphasize here is that this is truly a crisis that's really augmented by structural funding gaps that really force cities to choose between prioritizing preservation of critical infrastructure and then other essential capital projects, right? So this is things like making sure that you have streetlights that work and that we have cop cars that are able to go down the road and you know, making sure that we have other basic functions that as a city we need to provide that are available to our citizens. So kind of breaking this down a little bit further, I think it's important to also understand what city transportation infrastructure and the funding that goes into it really looks like. So, you know, the major source of city street funding comes from local resources. What this really means is that our jurisdictions at the local level are really kind of focusing their efforts on trying to figure out how to fund street and street preservation and maintenance from the local level. This also means that they're often going to voters and trying to really kind of create community support around funding these needs. So we use things like property tax and sales and use tax. E&O and utility taxes. Also, you may have heard some kind of buzz in this last legislative session around a transportation benefit district. This is a tool that a lot of our jurisdiction use to support city street projects or preservation and maintenance. But the other thing I want to identify here is that we really actually don't rely that much on state or federal dollars. Certainly they're important to us, but unfortunately, because they're such a small percentage of the pie, we can't reliably use those dollars to support the things that we need to really kind of maintain. And I think this also demonstrates that previous slide that I shared with you that shows that if we're unable to fund preservation and maintenance, it really balloons. So I think if you were paying attention in the last session, you really heard AWC kind of talk about this, talk about the need for support from the state in addition to the work that we're doing at the local level. The other thing I want to emphasize here too is that this is a tool, or excuse me, this is funding that a lot of our larger jurisdictions are able to tap into. They're able to kind of get that voter buy-in, but a lot of our smaller jurisdictions really do still rely on support from the state, and they wouldn't really be able to operate much of their city streets without that support. So it's a delicate balance that we're trying to demonstrate to the legislature of, certainly we want local options and we need those local options to fund our preservation and maintenance needs or local projects, but we also need this support from the state to make sure that we can kind of balance out the other competing needs that we have, like fire or police or some of those other basic infrastructure needs like water or wastewater. So looking ahead to moving, or really looking backwards now at this point, Move Ahead was a huge year for us. And we also, I think, should identify that we had other priorities other than transportation. So in the 2022 session, we had 3 legislative priorities. I do want to emphasize that, interestingly, they were all focused on infrastructure in some form or another. So one of our top priorities was to pass a transportation package. I don't think that this comes to surprise to anybody. Many folks were in the same position as we were, really trying to push the legislature to pass something meaningful. However, I think one of the things that we tried to identify and really truly emphasize was the need for preservation and maintenance funding with a local equitable share for local governments, right? So again, certainly there was $3 billion provided to state preservation and maintenance, but we really tried to emphasize that preservation and maintenance at the local level also means that the system as a whole is being invested in. And then beyond that, we also focused on ensuring that basic infrastructure like your wastewater systems had flexible state dollars and that they were well funded as well. We also, of course, focused our efforts on the Public Works Assistance Account, which has been really kind of a key function and a key tool for local governments to support infrastructure needs like drinking water and wastewater. And then finally, we also focused our efforts on protecting and expanding the authority of transportation benefit districts. As I mentioned before, this is a tool that we use at the local level to really support some of those transportation needs that we have. So what happened in the 22 legislative session? So there were a lot of mixed results for us. I know this slide might be a little bit more difficult for some of you to see, but what I really want to demonstrate here is that in addition to those 3 priorities that I just outlined, we also had a number of other things that we focused our efforts on. So we, focused on things like law enforcement and broadband and GMA. So, I think this is something important to remember about the key function of city government as a whole. Many of our members are juggling a number of priorities, which means that AWC is juggling a number of priorities. But really kind of diving into Move Ahead, I think the key takeaway here for us was it was a bit of a mixed result for cities. Certainly, many of our members walked away with some really important key projects that were funded, and we're really happy that that happened. And of course, like I say, we were really excited to see that Move Ahead passed, and it was a 16-year transportation package. Very exciting to see something in such a short period of time be accomplished in a short session. And then, of course, you know, as I mentioned, because we had our focus on adopting and expanding TBD authority, we were really excited to see that there was some councilmanic authority and an increase in the sales and use tax added into the transportation package. And then, of course, there was also an expansion of traffic safety cameras. This is something that a lot of our folks are quite interested in, making sure that their tools to really kind of address safety at the local level was addressed. And then, as Ashley mentioned, you know, we had a little bit of a mixed result when it came to preservation and maintenance for city and for local government as a whole. Certainly, complete streets were funded, and that was a great outcome. And certainly, there was some funding directed to TIB, but truly, in the grand scheme of things, it probably wasn't enough. Actually, I shouldn't say probably, it wasn't enough. As I mentioned at the top of this, we've got $1 billion in need for preservation and maintenance, and unfortunately, it will only continue to grow and be exacerbated without investments. And then, you know, I think one of the things that we were quite disappointed in seeing in this session was the last minute decision to sweep the Public Works Assistance account at $57 million annually to support the transportation package. We understood the political reasonings for doing this, and we also understood that, you know, there are a number of reasons beyond just a lack of resources, but to support this package as a whole. But it truly was one of those moments where I think cities in particular felt like, well, hang on, this is this is a moment where we're now diverting dollars away from basic infrastructure to support another package. And of course, as many of you know, the Public Works Assistance account has been a target of the legislature for many years to support other needs. And so I think it felt like one of those moments where we weren't being invested in as much as we were hoping for on the transportation side, and then we watched investments in traditional infrastructure also be diverted. And then the last thing I would note is that, unfortunately, you know, fish blocking culverts at the local level there wasn't an effort to address those local culverts either, and that was a little bit frustrating, especially because you know, many of us have advocated for a watershed approach, and unfortunately, without investments at the local level and only at the state level, this kind of deviates from that approach that many of us have been pushing for. I would note, though, that there were some other positive outcomes in the transportation arena. There was some statewide regulations around transportation network companies. So these are basically your Ubers and your Lyfts. And then similarly, cities are now allowed to establish 20-mile-an-hour speed limits on non-arterial roads. This was something that before you had to work with an engineer to drop the speed limit, so that we felt like this was a good improvement. You know, there was some legislation that focused on trying to deter folks from jumping off bridges. We supported this, but unfortunately it didn't move forward. And then, of course, while on this slide, it looks like maybe there are some losses, really these two things were incorporated into the Move Ahead package. So a program to help keep vehicles from lane departures was incorporated into Move Ahead, which was a great move forward for safety. And then, of course, our TBD efforts were looped into Move Ahead as well. So we felt like that was a real positive outcome. So, you know, all this to say, what are we thinking about in 2023? As you might guess, local preservation and maintenance needs are top of mind for us. And similarly, finding and identifying a sustainable transportation revenue source is equally important for us. I can't echo enough the message that Ashley gave you a few moments ago. Unfortunately, the gas tax is no longer a reliable transportation revenue source. And it will continue to wane in its ability to support transportation needs. And moreover, it's been a non-reliable source for cities for many years. So we're now looking ahead to the future, and we're identifying things like a road usage charge and other potential sources as something that can help support transportation funding. But I want to make it clear that we, in this conversation, absolutely are requesting that there is a direct distribution to cities to support our needs. Similarly, we are also looking to the Public Works Assistance Account because there was this move to sweep the account on an annual basis over the duration of the Move Ahead package. We're being hyper vigilant on this. We want to ensure that the rest of the diversions that are set to sunset in 2023 actually happen, and that there's a commitment from the legislature to honor letting those diversions sunset. This is a really important account for us, and it supports basic infrastructure so that we can also then turn our efforts towards transportation infrastructure needs. And then lastly, I would note that we're focused on truck parking as well. This has been an ongoing issue for many years, since I want to say at least 2016 and even before then. And we're looking for a collaborative solution with our county partners, our port partners, with PHMSIB, with Trucking Association and others to really identify a way that we can address this issue, come up with a really good policy position on it, and ensure that we're actually protecting folks on our highways. So these are just kind of a snapshot of some of the priorities that we'll be focusing on 23, in large part based off of some of the outcomes of Move Ahead. I believe that Axel will talk a little bit more in depthly around the federal funds, but maybe what I would note with that is that similarly, we're looking to the bipartisan infrastructure law as a way to support some of our local transportation needs as well. But again, that's somewhat in a limited fashion, unfortunately. And so I think looking ahead to 23 and to years beyond 23, we're really focused on making sure that we can identify a reliable revenue source for city transportation funding needs. So with that, I would be happy to take questions. I know we've got some other folks that are presenting, so I can certainly wait and make sure that I stick around and answer those questions.
Well,